Hey everyone, it's Jamie Batts, and this is Bio 221. I'm going to be going over the first part of Chapter 24 in this video, and Chapter 24 is the digestive system. So we're going to start with a little bit of histology. I kind of like histology. It's kind of my thing. So I have a little graphic organizer thingy that we'll draw out, kind of like what we did for the respiratory system. One thing that you have to realize about the digestive tract, just like the cardiovascular system and the blood vessels, you get all of those tunics and layers. You're going to see the same thing here in the digestive system. There's layers to the digestive tract. Now the digestive tract, I'm just repositioning this a little bit. The digestive tract sometimes is called the GI tract, sometimes it's called the alimentary canal. It's all the same thing. Digestive tract, GI tract, alimentary canal. It's just referring to the tube that the food passes through, and it's literally a tube from beginning to end, from mouth to anus. So I'm going to draw out the couple little things to help us understand exactly what this stuff is. And if you think about several different layers here, and this inner layer is the lumen, right? And the lining of the lumen, that lining that goes around the lumen, kind of like the tunica intima of a blood vessel, if you will, that is our mucosa. So that's the mucosal lining. There we go, mucosa. And so this mucosa changes throughout the digestive tract. In your mouth, for instance, we're dealing with a stratified squamous. But as you move through into the stomach and into the intestines, it's not stratified squamous anymore. It's going to be different. And I have a chart that we'll draw out to show us some of those differences. So you have mucosa. Then deep to the mucosa, this layer here, kind of looks like an eyeball. I didn't mean for it to look like that. That is our submucosa, right, because it's below the mucosa. Then you have this layer, let's see, what should it look like? We'll make it dotted. I don't know, I'm just kind of making this up. That is our Muscularis layer. And that Muscularis layer, for the most part, is made up of two layers of muscles. It's made up of longitudinal muscles and circulatory or circular muscles, round muscles, and that's just to propel the food forward. And then we have an outer layer, or an outer skin, if you will, and that is the serosa. So in other words, when you cut someone open and you're looking at their intestines, you're looking at the serosa. The deep part of the inner lining, that is the mucosa. And so that's that little kind of idea. Now let's talk about the different tissues. So as you move through the digestive system, it kind of changes. So we're going to make a chart. There's mucosa, then there's the lamina, which is kind of the glue that holds the mucosa down to the submucosa. And then you have the Muscularis Externa and the serosa. Can we see all that? There we go. So, some things, I've got to move my book, got lots of stuff on my desk. Oh, there we go. So, when we start in the mouth, and as we move to the right here, we'll just go down through the digestive system. So, mouth, esophagus, right, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, right? That's the tract, that's the tube that the food actually passes through. So, we'll talk about how all of these things change as we go down through our digestive system. So for instance, again, in the mouth and the esophagus, we're dealing with simple, or rather stratified squamous. And I'm just abbreviating for ease. Then when we get into the stomach and the small and large intestine, we're looking at simple cuboidal epithelial tissue, and there's special they're called enteroendocrine glands. These enteroendocrine glands, can you read that? enteroendocrine glands are special, kind of single-celled endocrine glands that live amongst the simple cuboidal cells that are there. And they're just there for regulation. There's this kind of internal brain to our digestive system, and that's what those enteroendocrine glands do. Now, the lamina of our mouth and esophagus has special mucus glands, and that's for lubrication. Just keep it going. In our stomach, small and large intestine, this lamina, that kind of middle layer between the mucosa and submucosa, has an extramuscular layer called a muscularis mucosa. And it's just a single muscular layer, and it's really just meant to help support the Muscularis Externa. It's just an extra muscular layer, and it helps some of the superficial mucosal cells move a little bit. Helps with their positioning. So the submucosa is all, well, the submucosa of the entire digestive tract is DICT, dense irregular connective tissue, right? A review from chapter 4. And this is, of course, where all the blood vessels and nerves and lymph and any exocrine glands, where all of that is located. So BV, blood vessels, nerves, lymph. Sorry, that doesn't look like a B. B, N, L. Blood vessels, nerves, and lymph, and exocrine glands are located there. Then with our Muscularis Externa, this is only present in the deeper layers, like the lower esophagus, stomach, small intestine, and this has a circular layer, as I mentioned, and a longitudinal layer. All the way through. In the stomach, there's actually a third layer. So in here I would write stomach. It has an oblique layer that goes at a diagonal. And finally, the serosa, or the outer covering. The mouth and the esophagus do not have a serosal covering. The stomach, small intestine, large intestine is mostly made of collagen. And then towards the very, very end, like the rectum and the anus, there's none as well. So at the very bottom, none. Collagen, all the way to none. So this is my lovely little chart. It's not very organized, but that's kind of how I think about everything. I think of it kind of as a spectrum, because that's what it is. There's no like, you are now leaving this and going into this. There's always gray areas in anatomy. So I want to make sure that I'm sticking in line with what your book says. I don't like to get too far off the book, so to speak. So we did the histology. Then we get into, and page 862 really does a good job of showing you that cross-section is just a generic cross-section of all those layers, so you can see kind of what I was talking about. So there's lots of regulation that goes on in the digestive system as well, and that's really where some of those endocrine glands come into play, because your digestive system has its own little brain and its own little feedback system separate from the parasympathetic nervous system that kind of rules it. It's actually a branch of the parasympathetic nervous system called the enteric nervous system. And that is listed for you on page 863, and then it goes into some of the ways your digestive system is regulated chemically as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and draw it out. I'm going to use my very sophisticated sock to erase my board here. Nothing but the best for you guys. So let's talk about now my foot's cold, just kidding. Let's talk about some of the control and regulation. So this is going to be control of GI, right? Gastrointestinal tract, whatever. There's lots of ways that the system is controlled. That's much better. So one way, we have special cells called pace setter cells. Pace setter cells. These are within the muscularis, so I'm writing in muscularis, pace setter cells in the muscularis. These pace setter cells are responsible for movements of peristalsis, oh my gosh, I can never spell this late at night, peristalsis, and segmentation. What are these movements? Peristalsis is that forward progression of the food. Segmentation is kind of a mixing and churning that happens. So peristalsis is this squeezing forward motion where those longitudinal muscles are kind of like slinking along and the circular muscles are pushing it through. And then every once in a while it will stop. The food that's been chewed up will stop, kind of mix and churn, mix and churn. That's the segmentation. That's all controlled by pace setter cells. Your brain doesn't care if peristalsis is going on. It's got other stuff to worry about. Your brain doesn't care if segmentation is occurring. That's what this local enteric nervous system does. It self-regulates and self-checks. So it takes care of this nitty-gritty stuff so your brain doesn't have to be bogged down with it. Some other things. Local factors. Remember I said kind of the big picture. Everything in your body is regulated in 3 ways. Locally, through the nervous system, and through hormones, right, through the endocrine system. So those are the 3 big ways that regulation occurs. Let's talk about some of these local factors. Local factors are usually prostaglandins, which are just little cell-to-cell messengers. Things like histamine, right, which is one of those chemicals that are involved in the inflammatory process. That's another local factor that helps regulate the GI tract. You also have neural mechanisms. And these neural mechanisms are going to help control secretion of various, sorry, I'm trying to move this forward a little bit, sorry, it's small. Secretion of various hormones, secretion of digestive enzymes, lots of secretion, and it's also going to help control major muscular movements, like bowel movements and things like that, right? When you're, passing major food through, especially the large intestine. There's also reflexes, and I'm just going to branch off here. Reflexes that play a role in digestion, and there are short reflexes and long reflexes. Really the big difference, sorry, I use my arm muscles here, the big difference is long reflexes use the central nervous system and short reflexes do not use the central nervous system. So in other words, long reflexes are going to require a higher level of control than the short reflexes. Short reflexes are going to be little things like the opening and closing of the sphincter muscles, like the pyloric sphincter or something like that. Whereas long reflexes are going to require a little bit of extra neural input, like the defecation reflex, right? It's going to be a long reflex because that's going up to your head, your brain, to say, hey, it's ready to come out, and hopefully your brain says, well, wait, I'm not sitting on a toilet yet. We can't let this come out just yet. So that would be an example of a long reflex. Finally, we have hormones playing a role here, and these hormones are produced by those enteroendocrine cells that I mentioned before. They are just spread throughout, locally regulating everything that goes on. So they're little hormones that go out into the blood and tell everything else kind of what's going on in the digestive tract. So let's stop here, and then in the next segment we'll get into some details about the stomach. All right?